So before I get into the main subjects of this video, my last video in which I was just summing up some world news at the moment, I didn't mention the series of explosions in the city of Bata in Equatorial Guinea. These were pretty serious, about 105 people killed, and it's kind of cast a spotlight on a small country that, very rarely gets media attention, but it's kind of opened up an issue around corruption in that state. It's presided over by one of the world's longest serving and most brutal dictators, Teodoro Obiang, and his regime has been accused of basically being responsible for this disaster due to state corruption. But like a lot of things from totalitarian states, it's probably difficult for journalists to get access. But anyway, that's another big story. 105 people killed in that disaster. Right. I want to talk about China. It's a subject I often talk about. And some might think I'm obsessed, but to be honest, I really think that in the world today, in the 2020s, there is very few things that don't involve China because it is so influential and powerful on the world stage at the moment. So I do think that the relationship between China and the West over the next century will, in many ways, define the century. I say America and, excuse me, I say China and the West, specifically China and the United States, but also China and Europe. Um, and I'm torn. I have a lot of feelings about this because for me, this is more than a news story. This is personal. And the reason it's personal is because for a large part of my adult life, basically the last decade, literally from about 2011 to now, China has been very important in my life in terms of work, in terms of people I know, in terms of a lot of things around that. I've lived and worked in China twice. Probably about a third of all my friends and contacts are Chinese. Um, so it's personal. I never talk about these things with my Chinese friends because I don't even know what sort of implications that could have on our friendship. That's why I don't bring it up. But if these things were to come up, I wouldn't shy away. I wouldn't hide my feelings about them just because I'd be worried about falling out. It's certainly not something I would welcome. But I will never betray my convictions ever, or something like that. If my friends misunderstood my position, then that's unfortunate. But I am a firm believer that you cannot sell your soul for anything. You just can't. And so I'm not going to sell my values. And there's two things that I want to address, which I think exemplify the sort of situation that we're facing. The first, these are both from the Times, but on different days. The first report is from March the 10th. The second report is actually from March the 9th. So two subsequent editions of the London Times. This is the first report. It's by Catherine Phillip and Didi Tang in Beijing. I'm just showing that because when I quote reports, I like to it's not my intellectual property, it's the journalists who cover the case. Beijing summoned UK envoy for defending fake news. I've mentioned this in other videos, and it's something that it's been on my mind the last few days. So our ambassador to Beijing, Dame Caroline Wilson, has upset the Chinese authorities, which is, pretty easy to do. They're very sensitive people. Um, and what was she done? What was the great offence? Well, she went to Chinese social media, the Weibo account, I believe, of the British Embassy, and she wrote an article entitled "Do the Western Press Hate China?" And in this article, she was defending freedom of the press, and she was explaining freedom of the press as the West values it. So the Foreign Ministry summoned Dame Caroline Wilson to make stern representations and made a statement accusing her of arrogance, double standards, bias, and manipulation. That is pretty damn rich coming from Beijing. I mean, this infuriates me, to be honest. The ministry said she had strayed beyond her ambassadorial brief and demanded that she reflect on her role. Wilson responded by reposting her article last night. I've I don't know of this woman, but I've suddenly got a lot of respect for her. She is a good ambassador. Um, the argument escalates a wider row between Beijing and London and other Western countries over the role of a free press. It also serves to underline Chinese sensitivities over the reporting of Beijing's crackdown on the Uyghur minority and the origins of the coronavirus pandemic. Wilson, 50, posted her article before media hit China last week on WeChat. China's, excuse me, I thought it was Weibo, but anyway, China's non-encrypted version of WhatsApp, in an apparent effort to explain the role of the free press in democratic societies. WeChat banned users from sharing the post. The Foreign Ministry said, as the top envoy of the UK to China, she, she purposely confused libel with news supervision by crying foul for some foreign media being sanctioned over fake news and untrue reports. She ignores the fact that the foreign side has cracked down on Chinese media, which is the article is full of the arrogance of being the master in ideological bias. It confuses the white with the black and manipulates double standards. Um, I won't read out the whole report because there's other things I want to talk about here, but Liu Xiaoming, China's ambassador to London for 11 years, returned to Beijing in January. He became well known for the fiery press conferences that he held in the Chinese embassy in Belgravia, upbraiding the British press for a lack of social responsibility for reporting unrest in Hong Kong. His profile rose when he appeared on BBC's The Andrew Marr Show. There was a part, I'm trying to find it in this report, it might have been in another report, where Dame Wilson said that I'm sure her Chinese counterpart, that is the Chinese ambassador to the UK, would agree. I don't know if she's referring to Lou or the new guy. Yeah, here we go. Wilson responded last night with a tweet. I stand by my article she posted along with a link to the Chinese text. He added, no doubt the outgoing Chinese ambassador to the UK, yeah, that's Liu Xiaoming, stands by the 170 plus pieces he was free to place in mainstream British media. Absolutely. You know, he's been very outspoken during his tenure in this country. Have we shackled him? Have we said he can't have his views? Have we, you know, tried to silence him in that way? It's of course not. Of course not. Um, you know, huge respect to the ambassador. She is showing courage and far from betraying her ambassadorial post, as far as I'm concerned, she is doing her job because she's not only a political representative of this country, she's a cultural representative. And part of her job is to defend Western values. She was explaining the role of a free press. She wasn't dictating to the Chinese. She was explaining something the Chinese are very keen to do when they're in this country. Their English language edition of, and I've got several copies of it. I remember one patronizing article. If the West wants to understand China, it should listen to the Chinese. I think it was China Times, not Global Times, China Times, which is a sort of English language newspaper that is available in the UK from the Chinese embassy and other occasionally you see it in newsagents. Um, where to begin? Everything they're accusing her of, they are exactly guilty of. Arrogance, double standards, um, just infuriating. I give her huge credit. In fact, to be quite honest, I felt so strongly about this. I actually tried to contact the Chinese embassy yesterday. People might think this is, I mean, the British embassy in Beijing, they might think this is a bit crazy, but I actually felt so strongly about this. I didn't mind using up credit. I wanted to phone the embassy and just offer my support as a British citizen. You know, I couldn't get through incidentally because obviously its priority is for Britons living in China, and I kind of half expected that. But I just wanted to vocalize that, you know, as a British citizen, I respect what she's doing. Um, I respect her even more that she's doubling down and standing by it. That is extremely important. Um, so, what are the next steps they will take? They might In the worst case scenario, they would expel her. It's not inconceivable. I really, really hope that Boris Johnson and Dominic Raab vocally defend her. Um, I'm frankly more emboldened by the Foreign Secretary than I am by the Prime Minister. I don't think Johnson has been anywhere near as outspoken as he should be about China's behaviour. I really feel that he hasn't proven that he is hardline enough on China, as I think he should be. And frankly, if opposing the jingoism, the arrogance, the bullying, the genocide, the severe human rights abuses, double standards, the imported nationalism, all these ugly things that Beijing is guilty of. If opposing those things makes me a hawk, I'm proud to be a hawk. Um, this might be a situation where we're going to have kind of tit for tat. He is summoned, and then we summon the Chinese ambassador. It might go that way for a while. I don't think it's going to be a case of expelling ambassadors anytime immediately, because with the Russian situation after Salisbury, that was a very specific incident. With this as kind of ongoing differences. However, I think if she is badly treated, if they try to put very severe restrictions on her or something like that, maybe even compromise her safety, which is unlikely. They're bad, but they're not stupid. Um, then I think we should really, really we should expel the Chinese ambassador. I can think of a dozen reasons to do so already. I guess the only reason we haven't is because, you know, China is a powerful country, and we do have to. I think we need to be assertive and hard line, but we also need to be careful about how we do it. Um, I'm absolutely disgusted by sheer hypocrisy. I mean, yes, we've banned CGTN, long overdue in my opinion, but there's still a lot of other avenues for Chinese nationalists, like regular Chinese nationalists, as well as the Chinese ambassador, can vocalize their views in this country. They have a lot more freedom here than any Westerner, including right up to the ambassador, has in China. Um, and as for their sensitivity, that's constantly used as an excuse for the thuggery. It's kind of this strange combination of being super sensitive little crybabies versus being these wolf warrior thugs. Like, do not mess with China. But there's another example that I want to raise awareness of. Um, and in the same article, actually, China guilty of genocide, say lawyers. China's campaign of persecution against its Uyghur ethnic minority has violated every article on the UN Genocide Convention, an independent review has found. The report by more than 50 international law experts, which runs to 25,000 pages, is the first legal, non governmental examination of a swelling body of evidence on Beijing's treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. It adds that the government under President Xi bears responsibility for an ongoing genocide. What I think is interesting about this wolf warrior diplomacy thing is that a decade ago, 15 years ago, under the Hu Jintao regime, um, there was still that defensiveness. There was still the whole thing about Westerners should not get involved in our internal affairs, but they were a bit more diplomatic in the language, even stressing Sino-British ties and that sort of thing. Um, but recently, they've become a lot more gung-ho with the language. The veneer of diplomacy has definitely went out the window. It's very sort of dumbing down. It's interesting that they even use Western terminology like fake news. Um, and this is a long-standing tactic of the Chinese regime, kind of using our own words against us. And it's just because they can't handle criticism. Now, the other case I'm going to highlight is kind of the opposite, in fact, of Dame Caroline Wilson. She has shown courage and she has stood by her position. Unfortunately, this next case can't be said the same thing. Book pulped over China virus claim, again, Didi Tang in Beijing and Oliver Moody in Berlin from the 9th of March. A German publisher has pulped copies of a children's book that said the coronavirus originated in China. following a barrage of criticism from Chinese diplomats and parents. The picture book, A Corona Rainbow for Anna and Moritz, was released last summer to help younger children understand the changes the pandemic was bringing to their lives. Obviously, this is a world changing event. It's going to have an impact on young people as well. So it sounds like a good concept. It was based on scientific advice from a tropical medicine institute in Hamburg. At one point in the book, Anna and Moritz's father says the virus comes from China and has spread out from there across the whole world. The first cases of COVID-19 were detected in Wuhan, China, 15 months ago, but Beijing argues there is no evidence that the virus itself first arose in China and has sought to discredit terms such as the Chinese virus. Well, of course, the opposite is true. There's substantial and strong evidence to indicate it did begin in China. Um, Over the past week, the Hamburg-based Carlsen Publishing House, previously best known for selling the German versions of the Tintin comics and the Harry Potter novels, have been swamped with complaints from Chinese people living in Germany. And that's actually a factor in this which I want to raise. A series of one-star reviews posted on the book's Amazon page, some using the same phrases, accusing the authors of spreading racism among children in Germany. The Chinese consulate in Hamburg said it had lodged stern representations with the publisher. Carlson apologized and said it had withdrawn the book. The statement on the origins of the virus that a child encounters in the book reflected the state of reporting at the time. It said, "We wouldn't put it that way today. If the phrases had hurt the feelings of any of our readings, we are very sorry. This wasn't what we intended and we apologize to those affected. The copies that are still available will be destroyed. We have asked for the next edition to be corrected." Corrected. The destruction of the book is a small victory for Beijing in its campaign to deflect blame for the global pandemic. A World Health Organization mission investigated the source of the virus but found no conclusive evidence that it come from China. Well, look at that investigation. They were hampered from the beginning by Chinese officials. It said the virus probably jumped from an animal to human but cannot specify how, when that occurred or where that occurred. China has suggested that responsibility may lie elsewhere. One of the diplomats accused the US military of bringing the virus to Wuhan, although no evidence was provided. Of course, the Chinese regime has no evidence for that. But let's be clear here in the book, the virus comes from China and is spread out from there across the whole world. Now, can that rationally be seen as racism against the Chinese people? No. This is a sad example of yet again a Western institution giving in to Chinese sensitivities. It should be said in this case it wasn't just wolf warrior diplomats, it was also Chinese parents. Well, they need to stop importing their nationalism to Western countries. If they don't like the fact that the first reports came from Wuhan, that's their problem. This isn't the first time Germany has caved into Chinese sensitivities. When the issue of PPE equipment was being imported to Europe, there was reports that Chinese diplomats were pressuring their German counterparts to praise Chinese handling of the pandemic in order to get this PPE equipment, which is disgusting. But that's another sad example of freedom of expression, and it's just tragic. And I think Merkel really needs to speak out and defend the publisher. And I think the publisher's wrong to cave into it. I mean, if you're Chinese and living in Germany, the book was working on the reports that the virus came from Wuhan, which is well established. It wasn't stirring up hatred against the Chinese people. But I think there is a danger that where there are xenophobic attacks against Chinese, um, you know, how the Chinese regime has handled this, it's kind of the xenophobia is being used as an excuse to trample legitimate criticism. This wasn't even criticism, it was just stating a fact. I mean, correcting it. So, what are they going to do? Are they just going to tell children, oh, we don't know where the virus came from, just to please Beijing? My message to those Chinese parents is, what the hell are you doing in a Western country if you don't like free speech? It's yet another example of the hypocrisy that they so often show. To be clear, I've no problem with, in fact, someone close to me, Chinese national. She lives in Germany. But frankly, if she took a hardline position on this, I would, I would tell her my views. Um, I just think it's very sinister that we are constantly caving in. By we, I mean Western liberal democracies. I would like to think if the same thing happened here, Johnson or Raab would, or the Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden would be outspoken in defending that right to freedom of expression. I don't know how anyone could rationally say that's stirring up hatred against the Chinese people. So I'll round this up. I just feel that there is barely a week goes by when there isn't another example of Beijing having a tantrum over something. And yet the same regime is almost certainly committing genocide. I mean, what they're doing to the Uyghur people, it fits all the descriptions of what a genocide is. I suspect it might be, and this is my speculation, but because there is a male surplus in China, it may actually be a demographic agenda to try and get Han Chinese men with Uyghur women. I mean, there's evidence that Uyghur women has been forcibly um made to be with Han Chinese men. So, the thing that bothers me most, again, and I've said this before, is not the arrogance and hypocrisy and bullying of Beijing and its diplomats. It's the continued Western weakness standing up to them. Dame Caroline Wilson is one exception, but there are others who are in positions of power, and I don't think they're doing anywhere near enough to protect Western values, freedom of expression. I have a good mind to go to that Amazon site. I don't use Amazon, but just to reiterate some of the things I've said here to kind of balance the reviews. Um, it's very concerning, because it shows how China's wielding its power to its advantage around the world. I frankly think that it's got to a point where this isn't just political. I think that, and this is going to be controversial, but I think that Chinese nationals living in the West, there needs to be an onus on them to respect their host nations and respect the values of their host nations. Now, some might say they have freedom of speech to criticize the publisher. The problem here is the publisher has been bullied into censorship. They can criticize the publisher. I think they're wrong, but they can criticize the publisher. I think they're wrong to pull the book, completely wrong. So it's partly their fault for caving in. But then again, what if they didn't cave in? Then, it would just escalate and maybe they'd even get threats of violence. I'm sick to death of the arrogance and bullying of the Chinese regime and its important nationalism. And it depresses me that we just continue to take it. I really believe that the point has come where this regime needs to be polarized as much as possible. How long are we going to continue to take their insults and their lies? Would saying China in the 2020s is akin to Germany in the 1930s be accurate? I think it might be a little bit hyperbole, a little bit, but I see some echoes. I see some echoes, and in a sense, it's even more drastic because in the 30s, there weren't German students around the world promoting the Third Reich, not in the same way. I think this nationalism is something that really, really needs to be confronted, and we need to be vocal about it. If I was Dominic Raab or Boris Johnson, I would say we are well aware of how China encourages nationalism in its citizens. We remind Chinese citizens that they are guests and they should respect the host nations. I honestly think that would be a reasonable proposition. Death of it.